Box FM with fear.
Welcome to Horror Box FM, Episode 7. Lean back, turn off the lights, lock your doors, and keep your eyes glued to the asphalt. Tonight, we dive deep into a chilling, extensively documented account from a veteran long-haul trucker that will change the way you look at lonely highways forever. This is a story of isolation, an encounter with the deeply unnatural, and a warning that could save your life. Get ready, because this is Never Stop for the Lady in White. The trucking life isn't just a job, it's a test of psychological endurance, especially when you are driving the graveyard shift through the vast, empty stretches of the Pacific Northwest. It happened exactly 3 years ago, during the first week of November, on an isolated, forgotten section of Route 30 just outside the Oregon border. The time was precisely 2:45 a.m., that specific hour of the night when the rest of the world is dead asleep, and the darkness feels heavy, almost physical. The weather had taken a severe turn for the worse about an hour prior. A dense, suffocating valley fog had rolled in from the mountains, swallowing the massive, towering pine trees that lined both sides of the narrow, two-lane highway. Visibility had dropped to less than 20 feet, forcing me to slow my 40-ton semi-truck down to a cautious crawl. I was completely exhausted, my eyes burning from staring into the gray void, and my heavy cargo load of industrial steel made the truck feel sluggish and difficult to maneuver. My thermos of black coffee had gone completely cold hours ago, and I was mentally counting down the miles until I could reach the next brightly lit interstate rest stop. To make matters more uncomfortable, the truck's radio, which had been softly playing low country music to keep me awake, suddenly dissolved into a harsh, aggressive burst of static. The sound was piercing, loud, and erratic. I reached over and twisted the volume knob to turn it off completely, leaving nothing but the low, rhythmic, mechanical hum of my diesel engine and the steady, hypnotic slap of the windshield wipers trying to clear the heavy mist. The silence that followed inside the cab was immediate and suffocating, creating an atmosphere of intense isolation. It felt as though the truck was the only moving object left in an empty, forgotten world. That was exactly when my high beams caught something unusual in the distance. About 70 yards ahead, standing directly on the solid white fog line of the asphalt, a distinct human silhouette emerged from the gray mist. As the truck slowly crept closer, the horrifying details of the figure began to materialize through the damp air. It was a woman. She was wearing a long, vintage-looking white gown, a dress that looked like an antique wedding dress from another century. What struck me as instantly bizarre was how clean it was, despite the damp, muddy, and filthy environment of the highway shoulder. The fabric was pristine, glowing and unnatural, bright white under my halogen headlights. Her hair was jet black, incredibly long, soaked thoroughly by the mist, and plastered heavily across her face and shoulders. She stood perfectly still, rigid as a statue, staring straight ahead into the pitch-black forest, completely ignoring the massive, roaring truck that was approaching her. My immediate human instinct, polished by years of driving, was to slam my foot onto the brake pedal. Seeing a lone woman stranded out in freezing, sub-zero temperatures usually indicates a severe emergency, a broken-down car hidden in the ditch, a terrible accident, or someone desperately fleeing from a domestic threat in the woods. It is the unwritten code of the road to stop and offer assistance. But as my boot hovered just an inch above the air brakes, a sudden, overwhelming wave of primal dread washed over my entire body. The air inside the heated cab instantly turned ice cold, to the point where I could see my own breath forming a thick cloud in front of my face. The hair on the arms and the back of my neck stood completely on end, and a heavy weight settled deep in my stomach. Every survival instinct embedded in human DNA screamed a single, frantic, desperate warning: do not stop. Do not open that door. Do not look at her, Trusting the sudden panic in my gut, I decided not to pull over onto the shoulder. Instead, I maintained my path, slowing down just enough to pass her safely without hitting her, my eyes locked tightly onto her profile through the thick passenger side glass. As the cab of the truck crept past her frame, time seemed to dilate, moving in agonizing slow motion. For a second, I thought she wouldn't move. But then, she slowly, stiffly began to turn her neck toward my elevated cab. The movement was completely devoid of human grace. It was jerky, mechanical, and accompanied by an audible clicking sound, like a broken porcelain doll being violently yanked by invisible, rusty strings. And when my headlights and cabin lights fully illuminated her face, the breath was completely knocked out of my lungs, and my heart stopped beating. She did not have eyes. Where her eyes should have been, there were only deep, hollow, pitch-black voids, two empty sockets that seemed to actively swallow the surrounding light. Her skin was not pale, it was a sickening, bruised shade of decaying gray, peeling slightly around the cheekbones and jawline as if it were a mask rotting away. But the most terrifying feature was her mouth. She stretched her lips into a wide, completely unnatural smile that parted almost all the way to her ears, tearing the gray skin at the corners. The smile revealed rows of sharp, jagged, blackened teeth that looked like they belonged to a predator, not a human being. Pure, unadulterated terror seized my muscles. Dropping all caution regarding the slippery road conditions, I slammed my foot completely down onto the gas pedal. The heavy diesel engine let out a deafening roar, the turbo hissed, and the massive truck violently shuddered as it began to accelerate down the straightaway. Panting heavily, my chest heaving with adrenaline, I glanced anxiously into my left side mirror, expecting to see her figure safely disappearing into the thick, swirling fog behind me. I desperately prayed that the encounter was over. But she wasn't standing still anymore. Through the reflection of the side mirror, I watched her entire body collapse forward onto the wet asphalt. She didn't fall, she dropped onto all fours, her arms and legs bending and snapping at impossible, broken angles that defied human anatomy. Then, she began to run. She wasn't just running, she was sprinting with an impossible, supernatural speed. Her limbs worked like a monstrous arachnid, keeping perfect pace with a 40-ton truck that was now rapidly accelerating past 50, 55, then 60 miles per hour. The terrifying sound of her skeletal hands and bare, muddy feet slapping violently against the wet asphalt was incredibly loud, audible even over the deafening, high RPM roar of my truck's engine. Asterisk slap. 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 Slap, asterisk. The sound was rhythmic, relentless, and closing in. She was gaining on me with terrifying ease, her trajectory aiming straight for the driver's side door. I screamed out loud in the empty cab, a raw sound of absolute panic tearing from my throat. I gripped the heavy steering wheel with white knuckles, my hand shaking so violently I could barely keep the rig centered on the narrow road. I pushed the heavy truck to its absolute mechanical limit, the engine screaming in protest as the speedometer climbed higher. But no matter how fast I went, she was faster. Within seconds, her pale, distorted face appeared right outside my driver's side window. She was floating, leaping, or running alongside the glass, her hollow, empty eye socket staring directly into my eyes through the transparent barrier. Her massive, ear-to-ear grin was wider now, her blackened teeth scraping lightly against the glass of my rolling window, creating a high-pitched, agonizing screech. She was reaching for the door handle with a long, gray hand tipped with sharp, broken fingernails. I knew with absolute certainty that if she opened that door, or if the glass shattered, I was a dead man. Just as I felt my consciousness slipping from pure terror, the highway ahead took a sharp, sudden bend to the left, leading toward a small, historical concrete bridge that spanned over a deep, rushing mountain river. It was an old structure, framed by thick concrete pillars and iron arches. The exact millisecond the front tires of my semi-truck struck the concrete grid of the bridge structure, a piercing, metallic, superhuman shriek echoed through the night air. The sound was so incredibly loud and high-pitched that it vibrated the dashboard and caused the glass of my side windows to crack under the pressure. It sounded like an expression of absolute rage, frustration, and agony. I forced myself to look back in the mirror one final time as the truck roared across the span of the river. She had stopped dead. She was frozen at the exact boundary where the asphalt met the concrete of the bridge, as if she had slammed directly into an invisible, impenetrable, holy wall that she physically could not cross. She stood upright once again, her pristine white wedding dress swaying heavily in the turbulent wind created by my departure. Her terrifying, wide smile was still fixed on her rotting face, her dark, hollow sockets watching me intently as I disappeared into the distant, foggy safety of the night. I didn't stop driving until I reached a well-lit, crowded truck stop over 100 miles away. When I pulled over, I crawled into my sleeper berth, but I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep for 3 days straight after that run. The image of those black voids and that tearing smile was burned into the back of my eyelids. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I began doing some quiet research into the dark history of Route 30. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Over the last decade, exactly 3 long-haul truck drivers had completely and mysteriously gone missing on that precise, isolated stretch of highway before the river bridge. In every single case, the police reports were identical. The missing drivers' trucks were always found abandoned on the muddy shoulder of the road, parked just a few hundred yards before the bridge structure. The driver's side doors were always found flung wide open, the headlights were left on, the keys were still in the ignition, and the diesel engines were still idling quietly in the fog. But the drivers themselves were gone. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, no blood. They were simply erased from existence, never to be seen or heard from again. They had made the fatal mistake that I almost made. They saw a woman in need, they felt sympathy, and they pulled over. They stopped their trucks. I still drive for a living, because it's the only way I know how to provide for my family. But I requested a permanent change of routes. I will never, under any circumstances, set foot in the state of Oregon again, and I refuse to drive on any 2-lane highway after the sun goes down. If you are a driver, an adventurer, or just someone taking a late-night road trip down a dark, foggy highway in the dead of night, I want you to remember my story. If the radio goes silent, if the air inside your vehicle suddenly turns to ice, and you see a flash of pristine white standing perfectly still on the side of the asphalt, do not let your human sympathy get the best of you. Do not slow down, do not look into her eyes, and whatever you do not look in your mirrors. Keep your foot pressed hard against the gas pedal, look straight ahead, and pray you reach a bridge. Never stop for the lady in white. Thank you for listening to this episode of Horror Bow.
Box FM with fear.